The warning was only 9 seconds long, and by the time it reached the listening posts of the Concord of Quiet Stars, the world that sent it had already stopped existing. Veilon Such was a recorder, not a soldier. For 200 years she had sat in the archive spire of Itar Deep, a slim gray shape folded over a desk of cold light, and her single duty had been to write down what happened so that someone, somewhere, would remember it. She had recorded famines and coronations and the slow death of 3 sons. She had never recorded a thing that fought back against being remembered. That was the part she could not make her people understand. In the days that followed, the enemy did not simply destroy, it unwrote. The 9-second signal came from a planet called Aresh Tool, a green and unremarkable world on the soft edge of Concord space, home to 11 million people who farmed light and sang to their children. Such had a file on Aresh Tool. She had updated it that very morning. By evening the file was blank, not deleted. Blank, as though the keystrokes had never been pressed, as though the 11 million had never sung. Only the 9-second recording survived, because Such had moved it to a sealed crystal the instant it arrived, on an instinct she could not name, and the sealed crystal sat outside the reach of the thing that ate memory. She played it again now, alone, in the dark of the spire. A voice, frightened, climbing. They are coming through the quiet. Do not wait for proof. There will be no proof. Tell whoever is strongest. Tell them to come before we are forgotten. Then a sound like a held breath being pulled inside out, and then nothing. Not static, nothing. The silence of a line that no longer had a world on the other end. Such had translated thousands of dying transmissions. They begged for rescue, for water, for mothers. This one had begged for something stranger. It had begged to be witnessed, as if the speaker had understood, in their last second, that the cruelest thing the enemy could do was not to kill them, but to make it so they had never lived at all. The Concord did not believe her. That was the second thing she could not make her people understand, afterward, when there were so few of her people left to understand anything. She had stood before the Pale Council with the crystal in her hands and told them a star-faring power was erasing worlds from existence and from history both, and they had looked at her with the soft pity that long-lived species reserve for the ones who have read too many tragedies. The first speaker had explained, gently, that nothing in the records corroborated her claim. Of course nothing did. The records were the first thing the enemy removed. A foe that hides inside the gap where evidence used to be is a foe no archive can prove. That was the whole horror of it. The Concord had built its entire civilization on the certainty that what was written stayed written, and the enemy had walked in through the one door they had never thought to guard. 3 more worlds went quiet in the following months. Such sealed each fragment as it came. A mining moon, a trade ring of 40 stations, a nursery world where the Concord raised its young. Each time, the same 9-second shape. They are coming through the quiet. Each time, the file gone blank before the bodies were cold. And each time the Pale Council found a reason. A solar flare, a navigation error, a clerical loss. They had 1,000 explanations for an absence, because absence is the easiest thing in the universe to explain away. By the time the Council was frightened, the Concord had lost 9 systems, and not one counselor could have told you the names of the people who had lived in them. Such could. She had the crystals. It was Such who first spoke the word that the others would not. She did not invent it. She found it, in one of the recordings, spoken by a dying station master in the last second before his ring of 40 stations went blank. He had called the enemy the hollowing, the thing that comes through the quiet and leaves you not dead, but never having been. And it was Such who said the second thing the Council did not want to hear. If the hollowing could not be proven and could not be fought by a people who refused to believe in it, then the Concord must do the one thing its pride had never permitted. It must go and find someone who would believe, someone who kept their memory in a place the enemy could not reach, someone who, when shown a recording of a world that no longer existed, would not ask for corroboration, but would ask only one question: where? There was such a species. The Concord knew of it the way a quiet neighborhood knows of the loud house at the end of the lane. Small, young, short-lived, barely 4,000 years out of their own gravity well, clustered around a single yellow star and a scatter of nearby holdings. The Concord had filed them under a word that meant, roughly, ungoverned. They did not bow to the elder powers. They did not join the great compacts. They kept their own counsel and their own weapons, and they had a strange, stubborn habit, noted in the Concord's anthropology with faint distaste, of refusing to forget anything that had been done to them or to anyone they had decided to care about. They called themselves humans. Such took the crystals, all of them, every sealed fragment of every erased world, and she petitioned the Council for a single ship to carry her to the human worlds. The Council refused, so she went without one. She bartered passage on a cargo hauler crewed by beings who did not care what an old recorder did with her grief, and she rode it for 4 months through the dark, toward a yellow star, carrying in her hands the only proof that an entire civilization was being unmade one world at a time. She did not know what she expected the humans to do. She thought, perhaps, that they would listen. She thought, perhaps, that they would file a complaint, or send an envoy, or offer their condolences and turn away, as her own council had done. She did not expect them to launch a fleet. She most certainly did not expect the fleet they launched. The hauler dropped her at a transfer station inside the human holdings, a clattering, crowded, gloriously loud place that smelled of oil and bread and 100 living things, and there a human officer met her at the airlock. The officer was not what Such had imagined a warrior to be. She was of middling height for her kind, dark-haired, with lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of long watches and little sleep, and she wore a plain gray uniform with a single line of silver at the collar. She introduced herself as Captain Lyra Maddox, of the Terran Deep Fleet, and she said she had been sent to hear the recorder's testimony. Such had rehearsed her plea for 4 months. She had imagined arguing, weeping, begging. Instead, the captain led her to a small room with 2 chairs and a table, sat down across from her, folded her hands, and said only, "Play it for me, all of it, from the first world. I want to hear every one." So Such played them, 9 seconds at a time. 9 seconds, 9 worlds, all the held breaths pulled inside out, all the silences with no world on the far end. It took less than 3 minutes to play the death of 9 systems. When it was over, Captain Maddox did not ask for proof. She did not ask for corroboration. She sat very still for a long moment, and then she reached out and touched the sealed crystal with one finger, gently, the way a person touches a grave. "They asked to be remembered," she said. "Yes," said Such. "And no one came." "No," said Such. "No one came." The captain stood. Whatever softness had been in her face was gone, folded away somewhere Such could not see, and what remained was something the old recorder had no word for in any of the languages she had spent 2 centuries archiving. It was not anger, exactly. Anger burned. This was cold and steady, and it did not flicker. "Recorder Such," said Captain Lyra Maddox, "I am going to take you somewhere, and I am going to ask you to record what you see, the way you recorded those 9 worlds, because in a little while, the thing that did this is going to want very badly to be forgotten, and we are not going to let it." The place Captain Maddox took her was not on any chart the Concorde owned. They flew for 2 days in a small, fast cutter, out past the human homeworld, out past the ringed shipyards Such could see crawling with welding light, out toward a cold star with no planets and one enormous secret. Such spent the journey in the cutter's small observation blister, recording, because the captain had asked her to record, and because recording was the only thing that had ever kept the grief from swallowing her whole. She watched the human worlds shrink behind them. She watched the traffic thin. She watched the dark grow. And then she watched the dark stop being empty. The cold star had a swarm around it. Not planets, ships. Such had seen great fleets before, in the long histories she had archived. The Concorde itself had once mustered 800 vessels to a coronation. But the Concorde's ships had been beautiful, slow, ceremonial things, built to be seen and admired. What surrounded the cold star was not built to be admired. It was built to end arguments. She began counting, and stopped at 400, and the captain, watching her face in the reflection, said quietly, 1112. As of this morning, we finished the last keel yesterday. 1112 warships, such as recording instruments, which had never once failed her in 200 years, recorded the number and then recorded her own long silence after it. You built these, she said at last, for us. In the months since the worlds began going quiet. No, said Maddox. We built them in the months since you arrived. The yards have been turning them out at 4 hulls a day. But we didn't build them for you, Recorder. Not exactly. She paused, choosing her words the way a careful person chooses footing on ice. We built them because of what you told us. There's a difference. You didn't ask us to come. The 9 worlds asked. We just finally heard them. The cutter slid in among the great dark hulls, and now Such could see them properly, and she understood that the humans had a way of building that she had no frame for. The Concord built ships like temples, all symmetry and gilt. The humans built ships like fists, long, heavy, blunt proud, plated in a dull matte alloy that drank the starlight rather than throwing it back. They bristled. Every surface that could carry a weapon carried one. There was nothing ceremonial about them, nothing meant to impress an envoy or please a council. They had been designed by people who had looked at the recordings of 9 erased worlds and asked themselves one question, which was not how do we look strong, but how do we make absolutely certain the thing that did this never does it again. At the heart of the swarm sat a hull larger than the rest, a great gray Leviathan 2,400 meters from prow to engine bell, and across its flank, in plain human lettering that Such's translator rendered without difficulty, was a name, Vow of Embers. That one's mine, said Maddox. Flagship of the last Lantern Fleet. That's what they're calling it, in the news feeds back home. The Last Lantern. Because the 9 worlds sent up a light at the end, asking to be seen, and nobody answered, so we decided to be the answer. Late. But not too late, if I have anything to say about it. Such turned from the viewport. Captain, I must ask you something, and I must ask it plainly, because I have spent 4 months being pitied by people who did not believe me, and I cannot survive being pitied by you as well. Her gray hands were trembling, and she let them. Why do you believe me? My own counsel would not. The records show nothing. There is no proof. There is only my word and 9 seconds of sound. You have built 1,100 warships on 9 seconds of sound. Why? The captain was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Such had not expected. She sat down, in the cramped observation blister, on the cold deck, the way a person sits when they have decided to tell the truth, and the truth is going to take a while. Because the absence of proof is the one thing we were ready to believe, Maddox said. Most species, when something terrible happens, the worst part is the destruction, the bodies, the rubble. You can point at rubble, you can grieve at rubble, but your enemy doesn't leave rubble, it leaves a gap. It takes the world and then it takes the memory of the world, so that even the grieving is stolen. And here is the thing your council couldn't understand, Recorder, but every single human who heard your recording understood it in their bones. She looked up. We are a species that remembers. It is the thing we are best at, and the thing we are worst at. We cannot let anything go. We carry our dead with us for 1,000 years. We build monuments to wars our great-grandparents barely survived. We have a word, on my world, for the particular crime of erasing a people so completely that no one is left to mourn them, and that word is the oldest curse in half our languages. When you played me 9 worlds being unmade and unremembered, you did not show my people a threat. You showed us the one thing we have sworn, in every culture we have ever built, never to allow. You showed us forgetting, weaponized. She stood again and brushed off the gray uniform, and the cold steadiness was back in her face. So no, we don't need proof. We've decided to remember those 9 worlds, whether the universe wants us to or not. And the last Lantern Fleet is what remembering looks like, when humans do it with their whole hearts. Such recorded every word. She would play it, later, to the few of her people who survived, and they would not understand it, because the Concorde had no word for a memory so fierce it could be loaded into a gun. But Such understood it. Standing in the cold blister, surrounded by 1,100 dark fists, she understood it completely, and for the first time in 9 erased worlds, the grief loosened its grip on her throat. They went aboard the Vow of Embers. The interior was nothing like a Concorde vessel. It was warm and loud and crowded with people who moved with the brisk economy of those who have a great deal to do and not enough time to do it. There was no guilt. There were no honor guards. There were thousands of human beings in plain gray, and they worked, and as Maddox led the recorder through the corridors, Such noticed that every single bulkhead they passed had something fixed to it. A small plate, a name. 9 names, repeated again and again throughout the ship, the names of the 9 erased systems, written in human letters, and beside them, written in Concorde script that someone had carefully copied from Such's own crystals before she had ever agreed to share them. She stopped in front of one, Aresh Tool, the green world that sang to its children. "You wrote their names," she said. "Every compartment on every ship in the fleet," said Maddox. 1,112 hulls. Every one of them carries the 9 names. We decided that if the enemy's whole strategy is to make the universe forget those worlds, then the fleet that goes to find it will be made out of remembering, bolted to every wall, so that even if every human aboard dies, the metal itself will still know their names. She touched the plate, gently, the same way she had touched the crystal. "We can't bring them back, recorder. We're not children. We know the dead stay dead, but we can make absolutely certain they are not forgotten. And we can make certain the thing that tried to forget them learns, in its last moments, exactly who we came here to remember." Such recorded the plate. She recorded the corridor full of names, and she began slowly to understand that she had not come to a people who would file a complaint. She had come to a people who had taken her grief and her crystals and her 9 seconds of sound and built them into a weapon 1,100 ships strong, because to them the worst thing in the universe was not death. It was the deliberate, surgical erasure of a life that had been lived. That evening, in a briefing room aboard the flagship, Such met the rest of the people who would carry the last Lantern fleet to war. There was the fleet's chief signals officer, a lean, sharp-eyed man named Petty Officer Halden Sayer, who had spent the months since Such's arrival doing something no member of the Concorde had thought to do. He had not tried to fight the hollowing. He had tried to listen to it. He had taken her crystals, all 9, and he had run them through every analysis the human fleet possessed, not looking for the enemy's ships or its weapons, but looking for the shape of the silence it left behind. And he had found something. "It's not magic," Sayer said, when Maddox asked him to explain it to the recorder. "I know it feels like magic. A world is there, and then it's gone, and the records are gone, and even the memory's gone. That's not a weapon we have a name for. But it's still doing something physical, recorder, because everything is doing something physical, and where there's a physical effect, there's a physical cause, and where there's a cause, we can find it, and where we can find it, we can put a great many missiles into it." He pulled up the 9 recordings, layered over one another. "Listen. Right before each world goes silent, that sound, the held breath pulled inside out. We slowed it down 10,000 times. It's not random, it's a frequency. Whatever your hollowing is, when it unwrites a world, it sings a note first. It has to. To do what it does, it has to reach into the place where a thing is real and pull the thread out, and pulling that thread makes a sound, even if the sound is below everything we can normally hear." He looked up, and there was a fierce, delighted hardness in his eyes that Such was beginning to recognize as a particular human expression, the look of a creature that has been handed an impossible problem and has just realized it is not impossible after all. The enemy thinks it leaves no trace. It's wrong. It leaves a note. And a thing that sings before it kills can be heard coming. And a thing that can be heard coming can be met. "Met," said Such. "You mean ambushed." "I mean met," said Maddox, before Sayer could answer, and there was iron in it. "We are not going to creep up on this thing in the dark and stab it in the back. We could, it would probably even work. But that is not why we built 1,100 warships and bolted 9 names to every wall. We are going to find the world it goes to next, and we are going to be there, in the open, in formation, with every light on every hull blazing, so that when it comes through the quiet, the first thing it unwrites is going to look up and see that for once, this time, somebody came, somebody answered the lantern. And then, she said, and her voice did not rise, which was somehow worse than if it had, we are going to introduce the hollowing to a species that has spent 4,000 years learning to never, ever forget. Such recorded it all. Her instruments had not stopped since the cold star, and somewhere in the recording of that briefing room, between the signals officer's frequency and the captain's iron, the old recorder felt the thing she had been carrying for 9 worlds and 4 months and a lifetime of being disbelieved. She felt it crack, just slightly, and through the crack came something she had not felt since Aresh Tool went blank. She felt hope, and under the hope, sharp and bright and terrible, she felt the first stirrings of a thing the Concord had bred out of itself 10,000 years ago, and the humans had apparently kept, polished, and ready. She felt the wish to be there when it happened. The fleet found the next world 4 days later. It was Sayer who found it, hunched over his console for 2 days without sleep, running the 9 notes against every world on the soft edge of Concord space, looking for the one that matched. The hollowing did not strike at random. It had a pattern, a logic, a preference, the way all predators do, and the humans, who were predators themselves and recognized the gate of another, had found it. The enemy struck at worlds that sang, worlds dense with life and memory and culture, worlds whose erasure would tear the largest hole in the fabric of the Concord. 9 such worlds had already gone blank. There were, by Sayer's count, a great many left, and one of them, a world called Enimar, blue, white, and beautiful, and home to 30 million souls, sat exactly on the line the hollowing was tracing through Concord space. It was next. Sayer would have bet his life on it. In a sense, he was about to. How long? Maddox asked. 6 days, said Sayer. Maybe 7. Then it sings over Enimar, and 30 million people stop having ever existed, the same as the others, unless there's a fleet sitting in that sky when it arrives. Then we won't be late this time, said Captain Lyra Maddox. There was a thing the humans did, in the long hours before the fleet sailed, that such recorded without at first understanding it, and only came to understand much later, when there was very little of her own civilization left to explain it to. They argued. She had expected a war fleet to be a single will, 1,000 hands moving to one mind, the way the Concord's ceremonial armadas had moved. Instead, the last lantern fleet was a riot of disagreement. In the long planning rooms of the Vow of Embers, officers shouted at one another over the charts. Engineers fought with gunners over what mattered most on a hull and what could be torn out to make room for it. 2 captains nearly came to blows over the order of the formation, and a third, a heavy-set woman named Idris Cole, who commanded the fleet's largest gunnery wing, told the acting commander to his face that his approach was going to get half the fleet killed, and the acting commander listened and changed it and thanked her. Such had recorded the histories of 100 empires, and in all of them, the underlings agreed with the powerful or were punished for it. Here the underlings argued with the powerful and were thanked for it, and the arguing did not weaken the fleet, but tempered it, the way a blade is tempered by being struck again and again. She asked Maddox about it, on the 2nd day at the Cold Star, and the captain laughed, a short, tired sound. "You think the arguing is a flaw," she said. "Your council never argues. It deliberates. It reaches consensus. It moves as one." She shook her head. "And it lost 9 worlds without firing a shot, because not one of those calm, agreeing minds was willing to be the one who was wrong, who said the frightening thing, who insisted on the warning no one wanted to hear. You came to us because you needed someone who would believe an impossible thing on the strength of 9 seconds of sound. Recorder, the only species that can believe an impossible thing fast enough to matter is one that is used to its own people saying impossible things and being right about 1/3 of them. We argue because we'd rather be loudly wrong 100 times than quietly wrong once. The 100 wrong arguments are the price of the one right one. And the one right one is what saves the worlds your consensus would have let burn. Such recorded it. She would think about it for the rest of her life, the idea that a people's noise was its strength, that the willingness to be wrong out loud was the thing that let it be right in time. The Concord had perfected the art of agreement. It had agreed its way through the loss of 9 worlds. The humans could not agree on anything, and they had built 1,100 warships in a fever and aimed them all at the one thing the galaxy had been too polite to name. There was another thing, smaller, that she recorded and kept. On the night before the fleet sailed, the humans held no ceremony. There was no muster, no speech, no banners. But there was a thing they did, ship by ship, compartment by compartment, that Such found her way into by following the sound. In a wide low hold near the spine of the Vow of Embers, a few hundred crew had gathered, and one of them, the cook, the same cook who had passed warm food down a line of gray uniformed hands, stood at the front with a small instrument and began to play. And the humans sang, not a war song, not an anthem. Such's translator struggled with it, because it was old, older than the fleet, older than the human reach into space, a slow and simple thing about a light left burning in a window for someone who has not yet come home. They sang it badly, most of them, in the rough, untrained way of people who sing not to perform but to mean something, and Such recorded it, and somewhere in the middle of it she realized she was the only being in the hold who was not human, and the only being in the hold who was not weeping, and then she realized she was weeping too, an old gray recorder of a people who had bred grief out of themselves, weeping in a warship's hold among strangers over a light left burning for someone not yet home. She understood then what the captain had meant about remembering. It was not a strategy. It was not even a virtue exactly. It was simply what they were. They could not put a thing down once they had picked it up. They had picked up 9 worlds they had never seen, and they could not put them down, and so they were going to sail into the dark and break the thing that had tried to make them put them down, because to a human, a forgotten thing was a kind of death worse than dying, and they would spend their lives to prevent it, the way another species spends its life, to prevent its own ending. The cook finished the song. No one clapped. They sat with it for a while, in the warm, loud belly of the ship, and then they got up and went back to the work of war, and in the morning the fleet sailed. She gave the order that night, standing on the bridge of the Vow of Embers, with the recorder of the Concord of Quiet Stars at her shoulder, recording every word for a people who would not believe it until it was over, and many of them not even then. The order went out across 1,112 hulls to 200,000 human beings who had built this fleet in a fever of grief and were now about to take it into a kind of war no species in the recorded history of the galaxy had ever fought, against an enemy that erased not just the body, but the memory, the proof, the very fact of having lived. The order was 4 words long: light the lanterns, sail, and 1,112 warships, each one carrying 9 names bolted to every wall, lit every light on every hull, until the cold star burned brighter than it had in a billion years, and turned as one toward a blue-white world called Enimar, and sailed. On the long flight to Enimar, Such learned the names of the worlds she carried. She had thought she already knew them. She had archived them, after all, sealed their final transmissions, named them to herself 1,000 times. But it was Sayer, the signals officer, who taught her that she had not truly known them at all. He found her one evening in the recording blister of the second warship, the one the captain had moved her to, and he sat down with a battered slate and said, almost shyly, "I want to ask you something, and you can tell me to leave if it's too much. The 9 worlds. You sealed their last words. But did you keep anything else? Anything from before? Anything that wasn't the dying?" Such had. She was a recorder. She kept everything. And so for 3 nights of the flight, she and the human signals officer went through the archives of 9 dead worlds, not the 9 seconds of their ending, but the centuries of their living. The songs Aresh Tool sang to its children, which Sayer made her play twice, then a third time, frowning as he wrote the notes down by hand. The trade customs of the ring of 40 stations. The names the nursery world gave its young, which were chosen, Such explained, by the color of the sky on the day of their birth, so that an entire generation might share a name and know themselves a cohort of one particular dawn. Sayer wrote all of it down. He was not a sentimental man, Such had decided. He was something harder and more useful than sentimental. He was thorough. And when she asked him why a signals officer wanted the birth customs of a world that no longer existed, he looked at her as though the answer were obvious. "Because we bolted their names to our walls," he said. "And a name's just a sound if you don't know what's behind it. I'm going to be holding the targeting lock on the thing that did this to them, all the way into the dark, by ear, by hand. And when I do, I want to know exactly what I'm avenging, not 9 seconds of screaming, a world that named its kids after the color of the dawn. That's worth crossing into a hole in the universe for. The screaming isn't the point, recorder. The dawn is the point. I just needed you to give me the dawn." Such recorded that too, and it was one of the recordings she would play most often, in the years after, to the young of her own people, because it explained the humans better than anything else she ever captured. They did not fight for revenge, though revenge was in it. They did not fight for glory, though they were not above it. They fought because they had learned what a place was, all the small living particular detail of it. And once they knew it, they could not bear to let it be forgotten, and the only way to keep a thing from being forgotten by a galaxy that wanted to forget it was to make the galaxy remember, at the cost of your own blood. There was a night, near the end of the flight, when the fear got into the fleet. Such felt it before she understood it. The channels went quiet in a way they had not been quiet before. The arguments stopped. The singing stopped. 200,000 human beings were flying toward a thing that had erased 9 worlds and 40,000 missiles and left no trace. And somewhere in the dark of the third-to-last night, the enormity of it arrived all at once, the way it does, and the fleet went still with dread. Such recorded the silence. She had recorded a great many silences in her life, and she knew the difference between them, and this one was the silence of people deciding whether they were brave enough to keep flying. And then the captain spoke. She did not give a speech. Such had braced for a speech. The histories were full of them, the great rousing words before the great battles. Maddox did not rouse anyone. She opened the fleet channel, late in the night, and she spoke quietly, the way you speak to someone who cannot sleep, and what she said was not about courage at all. "I know," she said. "I know what tonight is. It's the night it gets real, and the fear gets in, and every one of you is lying awake doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is bad. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. I did the arithmetic too. Some of us are not coming home, maybe a lot of us. That's true, and I'm not going to lie to you the night before, because you deserve better than to be lied to by someone who's about to ask everything of you." A pause, the small hiss of an open channel across 1,100 ships. "So I'm not going to ask you to be brave. Brave is for the morning. Tonight I'm just going to ask you to remember why you came. Not the orders, not me. The dawn. There's a world out there that named its children after the color of the sky, and a thing came and made it so they never were, and we are the only ones in the whole galaxy who wrote their names down. Tomorrow we go and make certain it never happens to anyone again, but tonight, just remember the dawn, hold on to that, and try to sleep. I'll see you in the morning." She closed the channel, and slowly, over the long dark hours, the fleet came back to life. The arguments did not return, it was past arguing. But somewhere a single voice began. Very quietly, the old song about the light left burning in the window, and another ship picked it up, and another, until across 1,100 hulls, flying toward the end of the galaxy, 200,000 frightened people sang a child's song about a light, and a window, and someone not yet home, and the dread did not leave them, but it stopped being able to swallow them, and in the morning they were brave, because they had spent the night remembering the dawn. Such recorded all of it. She had stopped by then being a recorder of someone else's war. Somewhere on that flight, between the dawn and the song and the captain's quiet voice in the dark, she had become a recorder of her own. Inamar did not want them there. This was the part Such had not anticipated, and it was, she would later record, the part that taught her the most about the species she had come to beg for help. The last lantern fleet arrived over the blue-white world 2 days ahead of the hollowing, 1,100 warships sliding into a high defensive orbit with every light blazing, and the people of Enimar reacted to the largest concentration of firepower in the modern history of the galaxy, not with gratitude, but with terror. They had not been told. There had been no time and no way to tell them, because to warn them was to invite their own council to forbid the warning, and the humans had decided, with a kind of grim impatience such was coming to understand, that asking permission was how all 9 of the lost worlds had been lost. So the first the people of Enimar knew of their rescue was a sky suddenly full of alien iron. They flooded the channels with panic. They begged the alien armada not to fire. They called it an invasion. They demanded the Pale Council explain why 1,100 warships of an ungoverned species hung over their cities, and the Pale Council, 4 months too late and still not truly believing, had no explanation to give. Captain Maddox listened to the panic for a full minute on the bridge of the Vow of Embers, her face unreadable, and then she did a thing that Such recorded and replayed many times in the years that followed, trying to find the bottom of it. She did not silence the channels. She did not order the people of Enimar to be calm. She opened a broadcast to the entire planet, on every frequency, and she spoke to 30 million frightened strangers, in a voice that did not ask for their trust, because she knew she had not earned it, and would not pretend otherwise. People of Enimar, she said, and Such's translator carried it down to the cities. My name is Lyra Maddox. I command the fleet in your sky. I am not of your concord, and you have no reason on this world or any other to believe a word I say. So I am not going to ask you to believe me. I am going to ask you to do one thing instead, and then I am going to leave you alone to decide what you think of me. She paused. In 2 days, something is going to come to your world through the quiet. It came to 9 worlds before yours. Those 9 worlds are gone, and worse than gone, because the thing that took them also took the memory of them, so that not even your own council can tell you their names. We can. We wrote them down. We bolted them to our walls. And in 2 days, when the thing that erased them comes for you, we are going to be standing in front of it. You did not ask us to come. We know that. The 9 worlds asked. We are simply not going to let it happen a 10th time while we have ships and breath to stop it. Another pause, and now the iron came through, quiet and certain. You may spend the next 2 days hating us, people of Enimar. That is your right, and we will defend it with everything we have. But in 2 days, you will know whether we were liars, and if we were not, then I ask only one thing of you. Remember that we came. Whatever happens to us up here, remember that somebody came. Then she closed the broadcast and turned back to the work of war, and the panic on the channels did not stop, but it changed. It became, slowly, over the long hours, something quieter. Argument, doubt, and in a few of the voices, very faint, the beginning of a terrible hope. The fleet waited. Such had not understood before how much of war was waiting. The histories she had archived compressed it. A battle was a paragraph. The months of dread that preceded it were a clause. Now she lived inside the clause. For 2 days the last lantern fleet hung over Enimar in perfect formation, 1,100 hulls with every light burning, and the humans did not sleep so much as take turns being awake, and Such moved among them recording. And what she recorded was not bravado. It was not the fierce delight of the signals officer or the iron of the captain. It was something underneath both. It was people writing letters home. It was a young gunnery rating teaching an older one a card game. It was a cook, a real cook, on a warship at the edge of the galaxy, making something warm and passing it down a line of gray uniformed people who took it with both hands and did not say much. It was Such realized fear, the ordinary fear of ordinary mortals who had decided to stand in front of the most terrible thing in the galaxy, not because they were unafraid, but because someone had asked to be remembered, and they could not bear to refuse. She found Sayer in the signals bay on the 2nd night, surrounded by the 9 notes, and she sat with him, and after a while he spoke without being asked. "We're going to lose people," he said. He did not look up from his console. "I want you to record that I knew that. The captain knows it. Everyone on these 1,100 ships knows it. Whatever this thing is, it unwrote 9 worlds without anyone even managing to fire at it. We are going to be the first to fire at it, and firing at a thing that erases memory is going to cost us, and some of the people I've eaten dinner with for 2 days are not going to see their homes again." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were red with sleeplessness and something else. "I want that recorded, because if we win, the histories are going to make it sound easy. They always do. They're going to say the humans came, and the humans won, and they'll bolt our names to walls the way we bolted the 9 worlds to ours. And that's fine, that's good, but I want one recording, somewhere, that says we were scared, and we did it anyway, and it cost exactly what it cost, because that's the truth, and the whole reason we're here is that the truth was being stolen, and I'll be cursed if we let it be stolen about ourselves." Such recorded it. She promised him she would keep it sealed, the way she had kept the 9 worlds, in a place the enemy could not reach. He nodded and went back to his notes, and she sat with him in the humming dark, the recorder of one dying civilization and the signalman of a living one, both of them listening for a note that had not come yet. It came at the 31st hour. Sayer heard it first. Of course he did. He had spent 4 days teaching himself to hear nothing else. He went very still over his console, and then he said, "Into the fleet channel," in a voice with no fear left in it, because fear is a thing you spend before the moment and not during it. "Contact." The note. It's singing. "Bearing and range coming now." It's early. A pause. It's not coming for Enimar from outside the system. It's already here. It's been here the whole time. It came through the quiet days ago, and it's been sitting in our blind spot, listening to us listen for it. On the bridge of the Vow of Embers, Captain Lyra Maddox received the news that the enemy had outmaneuvered her, had been inside her formation for 2 days, had heard her broadcast to Enimar and her orders to her fleet and her quiet conversations in the dark, and she did not flinch. Such was watching her face when the report came, and recorded it, and there was no flinch. There was only a small, grim tightening at the corner of the mouth, the expression of a hunter who has just learned that the thing she was hunting is also a hunter, and is closer than she thought, and is good. "Show me," said Maddox. And the hollowing showed itself. It was not a ship. That was the first thing and the worst. Such had imagined a ship, some dark armada to match the human one, because that was a thing the mind could hold. What appeared in the space above Enimar was not a ship, and not a fleet, and not anything the recorder had a word for. It was an absence shaped like a presence. It was a region of space, vast, perhaps 1,000 kilometers across, in which the stars behind it did not shine through, but neither were they blocked, because to be blocked a thing must be there, and the thing was the opposite of there. It was a hole in the fact of space. Around its edges, reality frayed. Light bent the wrong way. Such as instruments, recording faithfully, recorded readings that contradicted one another, distances that were 2 values at once, a temperature that was also a sound. And from the center of the unplace came the note, the held breath pulled inside out, rising now, beginning the long pull that would reach into Enimar and find the thread of its existence and draw it out, world and memory and 30 million songs together, into the place where unwritten things go. The humans had 4 days of warning, 2 days of waiting, 4,000 years of refusing to forget, 1,100 warships, and the names of 9 erased worlds bolted to every wall. "All hulls," said Captain Lyra Maddox, very calmly, into the channel that reached every one of them. "Target the source of the note. We've heard it sing 9 times. It is not going to sing a 10th. Her hand closed on the edge of the command rail, and her voice, when it came, was the iron all the way down. "Open fire, for all the ones who asked to be remembered. Open fire." 1,112 warships fired at once, and for one heartbeat, the space above Enimar was brighter than its star. Such recorded the volley, and her instruments could not hold it. The numbers overflowed. 40,000 missiles, beam fire from every hull that mounted it, the entire fury of a species that had built its grief into iron, all of it converging on the unplace at the heart of the system. The recorder braced for the thing to die. She wanted, with a fierceness that frightened her, for the thing to die. It did not die. The fire reached the frayed edge of the absence and it went wrong. The missiles did not explode. They arrived at the boundary where reality came undone, and then they simply stopped having been fired. Such watched 40,000 warheads cease to exist in the records the instant they touched the unplace. And not destroyed, not detonated, but unlaunched, as though no human had ever pressed a trigger. The beams bent into the hole and did not come out. The hollowing did to the fire what it had done to 9 worlds. It forgot it, and it kept singing. "It eats the fire," said Sayer, and there was no panic in him, only the cold, fast working of a mind that had 4 days ago promised the recorder it could find a cause behind every effect. It doesn't block it, it unhappens it. "Captain, conventional fire isn't going to work. It's never going to work. It unwrites the shot before the shot lands." "Then we find the thing the note comes from," said Maddox. "It's a region, but the note has a center. Everything has a center. Find me the center." This was the part Such would tell the Concorde, afterward, again and again, until even the disbelievers fell silent. The humans were losing, by every measure her instruments could record. Their entire arsenal had been swallowed by a hole that ate the memory of being fired at. And they did not stop. They did not retreat. They did not so much as slow down. They simply changed the question. If the enemy could unwrite the fire, then they would find the one place in the unplace that could not unwrite itself, the source, the singer, the thing at the center that had to remain real in order to do its work. A weapon must exist to be used. The hollowing could make the galaxy forget anything, except, perhaps, the one thread by which it reached in to do the forgetting. Sayer found it. He found it the way he had found everything, by listening to the note. The absence was 1,000 kilometers wide, but the note did not come from all of it. It came from a single point, a knot, deep inside the fraying, a place where all the contradictory readings resolved into one terrible certainty. It was small. Such's instruments said it was perhaps 400 meters across, smaller than a single human warship, a dense dark seed at the heart of an absence the size of a moon. And it was real. Whatever the rest of the hollowing was, the seed at its center was a physical object, present, locatable, there. It had to be. It was the hand that did the unwriting, and a hand cannot unwrite itself while it works. "That's it," said Sayer. "That's the singer. Everything else is what it does. That's what it is. And it's real, Captain. It's there. We can put fire on it. The problem is the 1,000 kilometers of unwriting wrapped around it. Anything we shoot has to cross the absence to reach the seed, and the absence eats the shot before it arrives." "Then we don't shoot across the absence," said Maddox. "We go into it." The bridge was very quiet. "Captain," said Sayer carefully. "A shot that crosses the boundary gets unfired," said Maddox. "I heard you. So we don't fire across it. We carry the fire in. We put a ship inside the absence, past the boundary, right up against the seed, close enough that the weapons release on the far side of the unwriting, where the seed can't forget the shot before it lands, because there's no distance left for it to forget across. We get inside its reach. We make it personal." She turned from the display, and she looked at the 700 faces on her bridge, and Such recorded what she said next, and kept it sealed for the rest of her life. "I'm not going to order anyone to do that. There's no coming back from inside that thing. It'll unwrite the ship and everyone on it, body and memory both, so completely that not even this fleet will remember they sailed. I won't order it. I'm going to ask for it. And I'm going to ask for it first, because the Vow of Embers is the heaviest hull we have, and because I will not stand on this bridge and ask my people to go somewhere I'm not willing to go myself." It was Sayer who spoke into the silence. "You'll need a signals officer to keep the seed lit up all the way in," he said. "It frays everything, targeting, navigation, sensors. Somebody has to hold the lock on the singer, by hand, by ear, by the note, all the way to the center, or you'll lose it in the unwriting and waste the whole run." He stood. "I've been listening to that note for 4 days, Captain. There's nobody on this fleet who can hold the lock but me. I'm coming." Maddox looked at him for a long moment. "You said you wanted it recorded, that you were scared, and you did it anyway." "I did," said Sayer. "Record this too. I'm still scared, and I'm still doing it." What happened next? Such recorded from the deck of a second warship, because the captain had ordered her off the Vow of Embers and onto a hull that would survive to carry the recording home, and Such had argued, and the captain had not yielded, and Such had understood, finally, that this too was the humans bolting the names to the walls. They would not let the witness be unwritten with them. The whole point of the last Lantern Fleet was that someone would remember, and so the recorder of the Concord of Quiet Stars was placed, against her will and for her own preservation and the preservation of the truth, on a ship that would live. The Vow of Embers turned toward the absence. It did not go alone. That was the thing Such had not expected, the thing that broke something open in her chest as she recorded it. When the flagship began its run toward the Unplace, 40 other warships fell in around it, and then 100, and then more, until a spear of human iron 300 hulls strong was driving toward the heart of the hollowing, every light blazing, every name bolted to every wall, and they were not all going in. Most of them would peel away at the boundary, but they flew the flagship in. They formed a wall of fire around the Vow of Embers, so that whatever the seed reached for, it had to reach through 300 ships first, and every ship it unwrote was one the flagship did not lose. One more second of existence bought for the run, one more meter of the 1,000-kilometer absence crossed. Ships began to vanish from Such's records. Not explode, vanish. One moment a warship flew in the wall of fire, crude and lit and real, and the next moment Such's instruments recorded that there had never been such a ship, that the formation had always been one hull smaller, that the name she had been recording a heartbeat ago was a name she could not now recall. She fought it. She had spent 200 years training her memory to hold what the universe wanted to drop, and she held now. She gripped the names of the vanishing ships with everything she had. She spoke them aloud into her recorder as they went, so that the sealed crystal would keep what her own mind was being forced to release. The reckoning of Aresh, the long answer, the unforgotten. She named them as they died. She named them as they undied, as they were taken back out of the fact of the world, and the sealed crystal held what the universe tried to steal, because that was what the humans had built her to do, and she did it weeping, and she did it without stopping. The Vow of Embers crossed the boundary. Such's instruments lost it. Past the boundary there was no recording, no sensor, no note, only the unwriting, and the flagship drove into it carrying Captain Lyra Maddox and Petty Officer Halden Sayer, and the names of 9 worlds bolted to every wall. And the absence closed over it, and for 11 seconds the recorder of the Concord of Quiet Stars had no data at all, only the held breath of an entire fleet. 200,000 human beings watching the place where their flagship had been and waiting to find out whether it had ever existed. 11 seconds. And then, from inside the absence, from the center, from the seed, came a sound that was not the note. It was the sound of the note breaking. Such's instruments caught it the instant the boundary frayed, the instant the unplace flickered, and she would spend years studying the recording and never fully understand the physics of it, only the shape. Somewhere at the heart of the hollowing, a ship that should have been unwritten had instead, in the last second before the unwriting took it, opened fire at point-blank range into the seed, close enough that there was no distance left to forget the shot across, close enough that the singer could not unhappen the fire before the fire arrived, and the seed, the small, dark 400-meter hand that reached into worlds and drew out their existence, took the entire arsenal of a 2,400-meter human dreadnought directly into its center. The note did not fade. It shattered. It came apart into 1,000 frequencies at once, and the absence that had eaten 9 worlds and 40,000 missiles and 300 warships convulsed, and the stars behind it flickered back into being one by one, as the unplace lost its grip on the fact of space, and the held breath of the entire galaxy was finally, after 9 worlds, let out. The hollowing died, not unwritten. There was no one left to unwrite it. It died the way every other thing in the universe dies, the ordinary, irreversible, final way, and it left, for the first time in its long and terrible career, a corpse, a spreading cloud of dark debris where the seed had been, a thing that could be pointed at, a thing that could be grieved over or refused grief, as the survivors chose. The hollowing, whose entire power had been to leave no trace, ended its existence by leaving the only trace it had ever left, the wreckage of itself, and the absence now of an absence, the simple presence of stars where for 9 worlds there had been a hole in the world. Over Enimar, 30 million people who had spent 2 days hating the iron in their sky, watched the unplaced die, and watched the stars come back, and understood, all at once and far too late to take back their hatred, that the strangers had not been liars. There was a moment in the battle that Such nearly lost, and only kept because the humans had built her to keep it. It came after the first volley failed, after the fleet's entire arsenal was unwritten at the boundary, in the long terrible minutes while Sayer hunted for the seed, and the hollowing kept singing, and Enimar's death drew closer note by note. The unplace reached out. It did not only eat the fire the humans sent at it. It reached, the way it had reached into 9 worlds, and it began to reach into the fleet itself, and ships at the edge of the formation began to fray. Such watched it happen on her instruments, and she nearly could not hold it. A warship called the Steady Mourner, 800 crew, a heavy gunnery hull on the fleet's left flank, began to come undone, not explode, undone. Her instruments recorded the ship, and then recorded a version of the records in which the ship had never been built, and the 2 versions fought in the data, and Such felt her own memory being asked to drop the Steady Mourner, the way the universe was dropping it, felt the name going soft in her mind, felt 800 people sliding out of the fact of having lived, and she did the thing she had trained 200 years to do. She spoke the name aloud into the sealed crystal, hard, 3 times. The Steady Mourner, the Steady Mourner, the Steady Mourner, 800 crew, gunnery hull, left flank, and she gripped it, and the crystal held what the universe tried to steal, and the ship died, but the ship was not forgotten, because an old gray recorder refused, with everything she was, to let go. This, she understood in that moment, was why the captain had moved her to the surviving ship, not only to preserve the witness, to station the witness exactly where the witness was needed, at the one console in the entire battle whose job was to refuse the unwriting, to hold by trained memory what the weapons could not hold by fire. The humans could not stop the hollowing from reaching into their fleet, but they could make certain that every ship it took was caught, named, sealed, kept, so that even as the enemy unwrote them, somewhere a record survived in which they had lived and fought and died for a world that named its children after the dawn. The fire was the captain's weapon, the fleet was the captain's body, but the memory, the refusal, the sealed crystal naming the dead as they were drawn out of the world, that was the captain's true weapon, and she had placed it in the hands of the one being in the galaxy who could wield it, and that being was Such. So Such fought. She had never thought of herself as fighting, in 200 years of recording other people's wars. But in the long minutes over Enimar she fought the hardest battle of the entire campaign, alone, at a recording console, against an enemy whose whole power was forgetting, and her weapon was the simplest and oldest weapon there is, which is to look at a thing that is being taken away and say, out loud, I see you, you were here, I will not let you go. She named the Steady Mourner. She named every ship that frayed in the wall of fire that flew the flagship in. 221 of them. She named them as they died, and she named them as they undied, and the crystal kept all of it. And when the note finally broke, and the absence collapsed, and the stars came back, Such was hoarse, and shaking, and soaked through, and she had not fired a single shot, and she had won the most important battle of the war. Because the Hollowing's victory had never been the killing. Any weapon can kill. The Hollowing's victory was the forgetting, the unbeing, the theft of the having lived, and against that one weapon, the only defense in the universe was a witness who would not let go. The humans had known that from the first day. It was why a captain had crossed a galaxy to find a recorder at an airlock, and not an admiral, not a weapon, not an army. She had needed someone who could not forget. She had found the last great memory of a dying people, and she had made it the keystone of the whole campaign, and when the dust cleared over Enimar, the proof of it was a single sealed crystal in an old gray hand, containing the names of 221 ships, and 9 worlds, and a captain, and a scared brave man, every one of them kept, every one of them held, not one of them forgotten. Such looked at the crystal in her hand, and she understood at last the whole shape of what the humans had done. They had not built a fleet to kill the hollowing. They had built a fleet to buy the time for a recorder to out-remember it. The fire was only there to keep the enemy busy long enough for the memory to win. That was the human way of war, she would tell her people, for the rest of her long life. They did not defeat their enemies. They out-remembered them. And there is no defense, in all the dark, against a species that simply will not forget. Somebody had come, and somebody had paid for it. The vow of embers did not come back. Such as instruments returned the moment the absence died, and she swept them across the place where the seed had been, and there was wreckage, human wreckage, the scattered remains of a 2,400-meter dreadnought that had driven into a hole in the universe and fired the shot that broke it. The flagship was gone. The captain was gone. The signals officer who had asked to have his fear recorded was gone. They had crossed the boundary knowing there was no crossing back, and they had not crossed back, and the recorder of the Concord of Quiet Stars sat in the silence of the surviving fleet and recorded the cost in the only way she knew how, which was completely and without flinching, because the man who was gone had asked her to. He had asked for one recording that said they were scared, and they did it anyway, and it cost exactly what it cost. She made it. She made it that night, alone, and she sealed it in a crystal beside the 9 worlds, and she would carry it for the rest of her long life. The last lantern fleet had gone to Enimar with 1,112 hulls. It came away with 891. 221 warships had been unwritten in the wall of fire that flew the flagship in. 221 crews drawn back out of the fact of the world, and the only reason the galaxy would ever know they had existed at all was that an old gray recorder had named them aloud into a sealed crystal as they vanished, gripping with 2 centuries of trained memory what the universe was trying to make her drop. The reckoning of Aresh, the long answer, the unforgotten. She had the names. She would always have the names. It was the smallest possible thing to save, and it was the only thing that could be saved, and the humans had built her, and the fleet, and the entire campaign, around the conviction that it was worth saving. The survivors did not celebrate. This was the last thing Such had failed to anticipate about the species, and the thing she understood least and admired most. She had archived 1,000 victories, and they had all looked the same: the cheering, the banners, the great roar of a people who have won and want the universe to know it. The humans did none of it. The 891 surviving warships hung in the cleared sky over Enimar, and they were silent, and on every one of them the gray uniformed crews gathered in their compartments in front of the plates, bolted to the walls, the 9 names of the 9 erased worlds, and now beside them someone had begun, already, that very night, to fix new plates. The names of the 221 ships that had flown the flagship in, and at the head of every list, on every hull in the fleet, a new plate, larger than the rest, Vow of Embers, and 2 names, Lyra Maddox, Halden Sayer. They had won. They did not feel as though they had won. They had stopped the thing that erased memory by spending the lives of people they would now spend the rest of their own lives refusing to forget. That was the bargain the humans had made, and Such understood, recording it, that they had known the shape of the bargain before they ever lit the lanterns. They had not come to Enimar to win cheaply. They had come to make absolutely certain that the worlds which asked to be remembered were remembered, and the price of certainty was the only price that had ever mattered to them, which was paid in the one currency a species that cannot forget can never get back. The acting commander of the fleet, a senior officer named Marek Tolan, who had flown one of the ships that peeled away at the boundary and survived to inherit a fleet he had never wanted, came to find Such the next day. He was younger than Maddox had been, and the grief sat on him strangely, like a coat cut for someone else, and he sat down across from the recorder with the same plainness the captain had shown her on the first day, 4 months and a lifetime ago. "She left orders," Toland said, "the captain, before the run, in case." He set a small data slate on the table between them. "She wrote them for you, recorder, not for me, for you." Such took the slate. The captain's orders to her were 3 sentences long. "Recorder Such, when this is over, take the recordings home. All of them. The 9 worlds, the 221 ships, this fleet, this victory, this cost. Take them to your council that would not believe you, and to your concord that would not come, and play them, and do not let a single one of those people look away from what it took to do the thing they were too proud to do themselves, because the only way the dead stay remembered is if someone refuses, forever, to let them be forgotten, and you, recorder, are the someone, and you always were, which is why I came to find you at that airlock and not anyone else." Such read it 3 times. Then she sealed it in a crystal, beside the 9 worlds and the 221 ships, and the recording of a scared man who did it anyway, and she understood that the captain had known, from the very first day, exactly what she was building. Not just a fleet, a witness. The humans had not only refused to let the 9 worlds be forgotten, they had reached across 4 months and the whole width of the galaxy to make certain that the Concord of Quiet Stars could never again forget what it had been too proud to remember. The last Lantern Fleet had been the weapon, such had been the message. And the message was this: somebody came. In the first hours after the note broke, the surviving fleet did a thing such had not seen any war fleet do in 200 years of archives. It searched. It did not search for survivors of the Vow of Embers. There were none, and the humans were not children, and they knew it. It searched the place where the absence had been, slowly and methodically, sweeping every sensor across the spreading dark debris, looking for the pieces. The wreckage of the flagship, the fragments of the 221 ships that the Unplace had reached into, and frayed. Such did not understand it at first. The frayed ships were gone, unwritten, drawn out of the world. There was nothing of them left to find, because the whole horror of the hollowing was that it left nothing. Except it had left something now. With the seed dead, the unwriting had stopped, and what it had not yet finished, unwriting remained. Here and there in the debris, the sensors found things that should not have existed. A sealed compartment, intact, that had been part of a ship the records no longer contained. A frozen survivor in an emergency shell, drifting, alive, belonging to a crew the universe had been told to forget. 41 of them, in the end. 41 human beings the hollowing had begun to unwrite, and had not finished before the note broke, pulled now from the dark, alive, belonging to ships that the records said had never been built. The fleet found every one. It took 11 hours. The humans did not stop until the sensors had swept the last of the debris 3 times, because to leave even one would be to let the enemy keep one final theft, and they had decided, 1,100 ships and 4,000 years ago, that the enemy would keep nothing. Such recorded the recovery of the 41. She recorded a young rating, barely more than a child, lifted from an emergency shell into the light of a rescue ship, blinking, confused, asking after a ship that no longer existed, and a crew the records had been made to forget, and she recorded the human medic who caught the young rating and said, before anything else, before the medicine or the warmth or the questions, we remember your ship. We have her name, you're not forgotten, none of you are, welcome back. And the young rating, who had begun to be unwritten and had been caught at the very edge of it, wept, because the thing they had been most afraid of, more than dying, was the thing the medic had just promised would not happen. That was when Enimar came. The world below, which had spent 2 days hating the iron in its sky, had watched the absence die and the stars return, and now, in the long aftermath, the people of Enimar did a thing the Pale Council never managed and such never forgot. They opened their channels, all 30 million of them, and they did not thank the fleet, because thanks felt too small, and they did not apologize for their hatred, because the fleet had told them their hatred was their right. They did the one thing the humans had asked of them. They remembered. Across 30 million voices, the people of Enimar began to say the names of the lost ships, broadcast up to the fleet, from the world the fleet had saved. The steady mourner, the reckoning of Aresh, the long answer, the unforgotten, the vow of embers. They did not have all the names, they took them from the fleet, ship by ship, and they wrote them into the permanent record of their own world, and they began, that very night, to build a monument, a tower of light on the highest place on Enimar, one light for every ship the fleet had lost, 222 lights including the flagship, burning upward into the sky, the fleet had cleared, so that anything that ever came again through the quiet would find a world that had learned to keep its memory and would not be made to drop it. Such recorded the lights coming on, one by one, over Enimar. She recorded the acting commander, Tolan, watching them from the bridge of his ship, with an expression she had no word for, and she recorded what he said, quietly, almost to himself, not knowing she was recording. She'd have liked that, he said. The captain, she always said the point was never the killing, the point was that somebody comes, and somebody remembers, and the worst thing in the universe is a light that goes up and nobody answers. Well, he watched the tower brighten on the world below. Somebody answered, and now they're building lights of their own. That's how it spreads, recorder. Not the fleet. The fleet's just metal. The remembering. That's the thing that spreads. That's the thing that wins. We light one lantern, and a world that hated us yesterday lights 222, and the next time something comes through the quiet, it's going to find a galaxy full of lanterns instead of a galaxy too polite to look up. That's what she built. Not a fleet, a habit, the habit of refusing to forget. And once you teach a galaxy that habit, no hollowing in the dark can ever finish its work again. He turned from the lights. There was grief on him still, and there always would be. He had inherited a fleet and a flagship's empty name, and 222 lights he would carry for the rest of his life. But under the grief there was the thing the humans never put down, the thing that had brought them across a galaxy on 9 seconds of sound, the thing that no enemy of forgetting could ever defeat. Make sure you get the lights, he told her, all 222, seal them with the rest, so that wherever you take this, whoever you show it to, they see the end of it isn't the killing, it's the lights. It's always the lights. Such got the lights. She sealed them with the 9 worlds, and the 221 ships, and the captain, and the scared brave man, and the 41 who were caught at the edge of being forgotten, and pulled back into the world. She sealed the whole shape of it, the warning and the launch and the fleet and the cost and the lights, the complete and terrible and luminous record of what happens when a thing that erases memory meets a species that has sworn never to allow it. And then, with the lights of Enimar burning behind her and the case of crystals in her hands, she turned the hauler toward the territory of the people who had not come. She went home. The surviving fleet escorted her to the edge of Concord space, 891 warships flying a slow honor formation around a single cargo hauler carrying one old recorder and a case of sealed crystals, and at the border they stopped, because they had not been invited any further, and they would not invade even the territory of a people who had abandoned the worlds they died to save. Tolan spoke to her one last time on the channel. The captain said you'd want to know whether it's over, he said, whether there are more of these things out there. The honest answer is we don't know. The note we found, the seed, it might have been the only one. It might not. If there are more hollowings, recorder, you send word. You send it to the human worlds, to the last lantern, to whatever name they call us by. You don't go to your council, you come to us. We'll have hulls building the day after you ask, and we'll bolt your worlds to every wall, and we will come, every time, for as long as your people keep getting forgotten, and ours keep refusing to allow it. That's not a treaty. We don't do treaties. It's a promise. From the fleet to the recorder. Take it home. Then the last lantern fleet turned, 891 survivors, and the empty space where 222 ships should have been, and it sailed back toward a yellow star to mourn its dead in the only way it knew, which was to never ever stop saying their names. And such sailed the other way. into the territory of the people who had not come, carrying the proof they had refused to believe. The Pale Council received her with the soft pity they had shown her at the start. The first speaker began to explain, gently, that the loss of Enimar's brief panic and the appearance and disappearance of an alien armada in conquered space were matters the Council had investigated and found to have rational explanations, and that the recorder's continued insistence on this fiction of a memory-eating enemy was, while understandable given her evident grief, not something the records could be made to support, because of course there rest no proof. Such let the first speaker finish. She had spent 200 years learning patience, and she had learned, in 4 months among the humans, something the Concord had bred out of itself, and she now meant to breed back in. She set her case of crystals on the table before the Pale Council, and she opened it, and she began to play. She played the 9 worlds. She played the 9-second warnings, the held breaths pulled inside out, the silences with no world on the far end. She played the cold star and the 1100 warships built in a fever of grief by a species that had heard the warning her own council had dismissed. She played Captain Lyra Maddox touching a crystal the way a person touches a grave and saying they asked to be remembered, and no one came. She played the corridors of a flagship with 9 names bolted to every wall, and beside each human name the Concord script that the humans had copied from her crystals before she had even agreed to share them, because they had decided to remember the Lost Worlds in the Lost World's own letters. She played the broadcast to Enimar, remember that somebody came. She played the battle, the fire unwritten, the seed found, the run into the absence, the wall of 300 ships flying the flagship in. She played her own voice naming the 221 warships aloud as they were drawn out of existence, gripping them with everything she had so that the crystal would keep what the universe tried to steal. She played the note breaking. She played the stars coming back over Enimar. She played the silence of 891 survivors who had won and did not celebrate. She played a young officer named Tolan, reading her the captain's 3-sentence order, the order that had made her, an old recorder, into the witness the whole campaign was built to preserve. And then she played the last thing, the recording the signals officer had asked her to keep. A scared man in a humming dark, saying, "I want one recording, somewhere, that says we were scared, and we did it anyway, and it cost exactly what it cost, because the truth was being stolen, and I'll be cursed if we let it be stolen about ourselves." When it was over, the Pale Council of the Concord of Quiet Stars sat in a silence it did not have a word for, because it had spent 10,000 years making certain it would never need one. The first speaker did not explain anything further. Such closed the case. She rose, an old gray recorder who had been pitied and disbelieved and proven right at a cost she would have given anything not to have proof of, and she spoke to the council in a voice she had learned at a human airlock from a captain who was now a name bolted to 891 walls. "You will not file these recordings," she said. "You will not lose them the way you lose things that are difficult. You will copy them, every one, into every archive in the Concord, and you will teach the young to play them, and when they ask why a memory must be guarded so fiercely, you will tell them about the 9 worlds, and the 221 ships, and the people who came when we would not, and you will tell them the names, all of them, every time, forever." She lifted the case. "Because there may be more hollowings in the dark, and if there are, I am going to do exactly what the captain told me to do. I am going to send word, not to you, but to a yellow star, where there is a fleet that builds the day after it is asked, and bolts are dead to its walls. They have made us a promise. We did not earn it. We are going to spend the rest of our existence trying to deserve it, and the first step, speakers, the very first step, is that this council is never again going to look at a world crying out to be remembered and decide it would be easier to forget." She walked out of the chamber with the crystals in her hands, and behind her, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Concord of Quiet Stars began, slowly and painfully, and far too late, to remember how to grieve. Such lived a long time after that. She was a recorder, and recorders are patient, and she had a great deal left to record. She saw the Concord change, slowly, the way old and proud things change, which is grudgingly, and then all at once. She saw the 9 erased worlds restored to the archives, their names taught to the young, their songs reconstructed from the fragments she had sealed, sung again by children who would never know the worlds they came from but would know, always, that they had existed, and had been loved, and had been avenged. She saw the 221 ships entered into the permanent record of the Concord, an honor the Concord had never before granted to outsiders. 891 warships worth of dead strangers who had died for worlds that were not theirs. She saw the Pale Council learn the human word for the crime of erasing a people so completely that no one is left to mourn them, and adopt it, and swear, as the humans had sworn, never to allow it. And once, near the end of her long life, she was asked by a young recorder, one of the new ones she had trained, what the humans had been like. The young one had only the records to go by, and the records, however faithful, could not hold the thing that mattered. So they asked the old recorder directly, what were they like, the ones who came when no one else would? Such thought about it for a long time. They could not forget, she said at last. That was the whole of them, the best and the worst of them, the thing that made them terrible, and the thing that made them come. Every other species I have ever archived learns, eventually, to let go. It is how we survive grief. We file it, and we close the file, and we go on. The humans never learned how. They carried everything, every wrong done to them, every soul they ever lost, every world that ever cried out and was not answered. They carried all of it, forever, bolted to their walls. And when something came into the galaxy whose entire power was to make us forget, it met the one species that had never once, in 4,000 years, agreed to. She held up a crystal, 9 worlds, 221 ships, a flagship, a captain, a scared man who did it anyway. The whole sealed weight of a war fought over a single question, which was not who is strongest, but who will be remembered. They lost the vow of embers, she said. They lost the captain who built the fleet, and the man who broke the note. They lost 221 hulls and the crews inside them, and they would tell you, every one of them, that they did not win cheaply, and they would not have wanted to. But they stopped the thing that erased the galaxy's memory, and they did it by being the one thing in all the dark that simply would not be made to forget. And then they made certain that we never could again. She set the crystal down. That is what they were like. They came when no one else would. They paid more than anyone else could have borne, and the only monument they ever asked for was that somebody, somewhere, would refuse, forever, to let it go unremembered. She smiled, the slow gray smile of a creature very near the end of a very long life. So I refuse, she said. I have refused for all these years, and I am training you to refuse after me, and you will train the ones who come after you. That is the promise. From the recorder to the fleet, and from the fleet to every world that ever cries out into the quiet, and is afraid no one will come. She closed the case of crystals, gently, the way a captain had once touched a grave. Somebody came. Write it down. Never let it be forgotten. That is all they ever wanted, and it is the least and the most that we can give them. And the young recorder took up the crystals, and the names, and the promise, and carried them forward into the long memory of a people who had finally, at terrible cost, learned how to keep one. The lanterns are still lit. They have never gone out, and anywhere in the dark, on any world, if you cry out into the quiet, and are afraid that no one will hear, you should know this one thing, recorded faithfully and sealed against all forgetting by an old gray recorder who learned it from the bravest people she ever archived. Somebody is listening, and if the worst thing comes, somebody will come. They always do. They never forget.